and then enter the third storyline where she is horrifically pregnant with a Cadillac's baby. What do you want to unpack first? And welcome back to the White Noise podcast. If you don't already know, I'm Sky and I'm joined as usual by my darling co-host Leanna.
Okay.
Today I'm going to start our episode a little differently than usual by asking you a question. What is the first film you think of when I say the words forbidden love? When I asked this question on Instagram and Twitter, a lot of people came back and said things like Romeo and Juliet, Titanic, or any variation of queer films. And you're not wrong. But that's not what we're talking about today. I actually can't think about exactly how to summarize the films we're talking about today. For one of them, monster love. Another one, cannibalistic love. And then the last one, I don't even fucking know. But the three films we're talking about in our Forbidden Love episode today are The Shape of Water, Bones and All, and Titane.
Yeah, lovely introduction from Sky. I agree. I don't really know how we'd sum up that last one in the list, but we'll get around to it and we'll figure it out. But anyway, the three films we're talking about, if we could sum them all up together, I would say that they're not just, say, films that are about, say, like forbidden love in that it's two people that can't be together. It's debatable. You could argue maybe it's like they just shouldn't be. Not that they can't, they just shouldn't be.
One of them, yeah, definitely.
Well, I would say for probably all three.
Maybe all of them, yeah.
But yeah, basically what me and Sky really love about, say, this particular type of forbidden love story is that it kind of is about repression, taboos. It kind of gets to more like the idea of passion as well than like a lot of like typical romance would. Just like the raw energy of these films. It's like magnetic, that's why a lot of people really do enjoy these. In particular, it's something a lot of people have said about Titane, isn't it? And I guess the best way we could do this is we talk about each film in order. So we should start with The Shape of Water, really.
Yeah, so The Shape of Water, oh my god, what was that
Australian
accent? Oh my god.
Water.
Stop it. Released in 2017 and directed by the reigning king of creature horror, Guillermo del Toro, The Shape of Water follows Elisa, a mute woman who works at a top-secret research facility in the 1960s. Hidden in this facility, other than raging toxic masculinity, is an amphibious creature. Elisa and this creature bond over their experience of being outsiders and treated like trash because of it, as well as their undying love for hard-boiled eggs.
Hell yeah, what a summary.
Yeah. All the best parts.
First thing I want to say, if we're going to talk about The Shape of Water, is I did not think I could go into a film about an amphibious man and actually buy into them as a leading man.
Okay, now I knew I was going to, and I don't know what this says about me, but The Shape of Water made me realize I like these kind of romance films. For example, like one of my favorite Disney films is Beauty and the Beast. I don't know why, but I don't know if it's because of like the metaphors that come from them, and like you said, the fact that like I don't know, they seem to be a lot more passionate.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I completely bought into it and didn't question it until like the internet blew up and was freaking out about it.
I was the same. Like, I understood that on the surface, like, yeah, it's a bit bizarre, but it was really mad to me that a lot of people watched that film and like weren't able to just go, okay, this is two individuals. Like, they were too focused on the fact that the creature was a creature. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's not what they're trying to do here.
Yeah, I think everybody knows why. It's because they have sex in the film. It's not like other films like that. So say, for example, like Beauty and the Beast, where it's just like, obviously they fall in love and they love each other, but like it's not kind of quote unquote forced in your face by like any physical intimacy. But obviously we know they do have sex. And then also because of that scene, there was the whole thing that happened on social media about people talking about how there was a much more detailed, explicit version of that scene. And that's what everybody focused on instead of like the love, and not just the love, but genuinely the message within the
Yeah.
film, because it's really important that I think people remember that the character of Elisa, she obviously uses sign language to communicate with people, but she's not deaf. She's
Hmm.
mute. And
Hmm.
it's not like just a coincidence that they decided to do that, because the creature is also mute. It's the whole film's about being silenced and being voiceless, and
Hmm.
then finding somebody who has had that same experience, that kind of shared trauma,
Hmm.
because, it's alluded to that she had some, or maybe it's completely said, I don't know, I haven't actually watched this film in a while, but she has scars on her neck, so something happened, which means she no longer can talk. And then obviously the creature goes through horrendous torture in that facility, and it bonds them.
It's interesting that you brought up like the shared trauma aspect and then being the same, because obviously that's very familiar to the second film we'll be talking about, but we'll get to that.
Mhm.
I think that's something that a lot of people probably missed when they were watching the film. Like, I was the same as you. When I first watched The Shape of Water, I immediately bought into the romance, and that was definitely helped by how much Guillermo del Toro is able to make like a romantic atmosphere, which, we already saw with like Crimson Peak. He is so good at like almost like that gothic romance. I can like feel like a gothic romance vibe when I watch The Shape of Water,
Well,
and the
people have
music
described
helps.
it exactly. People
Mm.
have described it as an adult fairy tale, which I think is
Yes.
beautiful.
I mean, that's all of his films, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
true.
I'm just, to this day, I'm so happy that Doug Jones, who is in like every Del Toro film, I'm so happy that it was him in that suit and not just like
Hmm.
CGI, because you
Yeah.
would never be able to buy a romance if it was, computer generated image. Like, it had to be
Hmm.
a person.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
we've spoken about this before, like in our Summer of Aliens episode, about like CG versus practical effects.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, and like CGI is like good, I think, for like stuff that doesn't really matter, which
Hmm.
sounds bad, but
I
it's
get what
like
you
you
mean.
said, if I'm gonna have this humanoid figure on
Mm.
screen trying to make me believe that, they're falling in love with this woman, I can't be thinking, I can see right through you, like
Yeah, you
literally.
can't be thinking like I can literally see the lines. Like, they need to actually be able to embrace. So those
Yeah.
scenes like where they embrace, that genuinely is two people embracing. I
Hmm.
really like as well, like, I don't know if you've ever seen any interviews of Doug Jones about the film or read anything. He was told constantly, be less human. So Del Toro would constantly say less human, because he
Oh
would
god.
be doing like, I don't know, like gesticulating, like walking like a human.
Yeah.
Because I guess in his head he's like, oh, it's a romance, like I'm a leading man. But they
Yeah.
didn't want that. They were like, no, this is a romance, but you're not playing a human.
Oh my god, that's so funny. Also, just like, even though we're both saying we buy into the romance of it, thinking about the creature as a leading man is quite funny.
Yeah, I love it. It's
Because it's
brilliant, isn't
true.
it? Yeah,
Your leading lady and your leading man are those two,
it's
100%.
brilliant.
It is
I
brilliant.
I love that film so much,
Mhm.
honestly. I'm genuinely so happy we're talking about it today, because I feel like what happened is, for that year, it was everywhere because of all the talking. And I mean, don't get me wrong, like, yeah, it won Best Picture, but it's really funny because it won Best Picture, but then it feels like it kind of was kind of low key forgotten. Like,
I think so too.
it doesn't really ever get discussed when we talk about
And
like good films from the last 5, 10 years.
do you know what? I think it's because of the freaky deaky love story of it.
I
People
would
don't want to
absolutely agree.
admit, yeah, people don't want to admit that it's a beautiful love story.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because of that reason. And I think it
Well,
frustrates me.
it's a similar thing to what happened to Brokeback Mountain, unfortunately, because it
So
got
true.
so memed. No one really discusses it. Like, Brokeback Mountain is a brilliant film, and
Mhm.
now people just meme it as the gay Jake Gyllenhaal film. And it's
I
like,
said this
at
to
the end
you
of the day,
before,
it is
didn't
funny
I?
to be like,
Yeah.
OMG, Jake Gyllenhaal as a gay cowboy. Like, all you see is memes where people go on about Jake Gyllenhaal getting raw dogged, and like, don't get me wrong, I've had a giggle. I have giggled at those tweets, but I still appreciate the film and acknowledge it is a brilliant film. But
Mhm.
it's such a shame that like that didn't even enter the awards circuit properly
Mhm.
because of that. So I guess there has been progress, to go from, a gay romance to
Yeah.
I mean, in uh, like progress in that people can kind of like buy into a story more. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like, as much as we're saying, oh, it got forgotten, at least people were able to like acknowledge that it is good. you know?
I think it's because the people who would give those films the praise that they deserve and put them into like the award circuit and stuff like that, as obviously time has gone on, those people have been given more of a platform themselves. And like,
Yeah.
I'm not just saying the queer community. You know,
Mm.
there's a whole host of different kinds of communities that didn't have a voice
Yeah.
during certain times, and I feel like The Shape of Water, even when it came out, like it's in 2017, it wasn't that long ago, but
Mm.
in like society, it feels like 100 years ago
Like a
with the way
lot
things
has,
have
I
so
agree.
much.
Not enough has changed, but a significant amount has.
Mhm.
I definitely think what's really interesting you bringing up the queer community is The Shape of Water definitely has a massive queer fan base. Like
Yeah.
100% they rallied behind it. And what is fascinating to me, I mean, we always do this without necessarily being conscious of it. All three of the films we're talking about right now have big queer fan bases.
I I know
I didn't
two
even
of
think
these
about it. I was like, these are good.
two of these films I only watched recently, and even when I was watching them, I was like, oh my god, we just can't escape the queer. Like,
We
we
really
talk about
can.
so much how we're not a horror podcast, and like, I'm not going to deny that we're not a queer
Mm.
podcast because we are to some extent, but I was just like, we just unintentionally, all the
Yeah.
media we consume and talk about, it just, or everything's just queer, one or the other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're not a queer podcast. We're not a horror podcast. We're a queer horror podcast.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Do you know one thing I found really interesting about this that I never really thought about, but it makes so much sense, is something apparently Octavia Spencer said about the film.
Mhm.
She said that by making the two main characters mute, the majority of the lines, or a lot of the lines in the film, are spoken by a gay man and a black woman, which is interesting because during the 1960s, you know, if this film had come out during the era it was
Mm.
actually set, they would have had no lines or just not been in it.
That's such a brilliant point.
Mm-hmm.
And
So I,
Octavia Spencer was absolutely amazing in that film, I thought.
yeah.
She brought like a heart to it while also managing to lean into the ridiculousness of the concept. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like we were talking about the sex scene earlier, when her and Eliza are discussing the actual mechanics of how that would happen. I just thought
What
that's
is
so
it? Doesn't she
brilliant to
just go?
include.
She
Yeah, she
just like
like
just opens her hands. Oh my
I
god.
love that bit because it's like acknowledging, it's addressing what we're all thinking as viewers. And
Mm-hmm.
like you could even really, in a very bizarre and roundabout way, you could even link that to say like queer experiences. Like the whole like
I
yeah,
totally agree. I was thinking it like
yeah,
as you were saying it. Yeah.
yeah. It's like it's so bizarre how it all links up so much, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I just Shape of Water, man, like give it its flowers. It's such a brilliant film.
I wonder if for this particular film then it's to do with like maybe the reason it like got such a big following, or like people love it as much as they do, is like because you have people like us
Mm,
who are loud and proud, we love this film, it's
mhm,
great. And then you have other people that like in public might be like, oh no, it's a weird film, but then they are super intrigued by it and they're drawn
mm,
into the love story,
mhm.
but then also, and there's no shame in this, super interested in, yeah, how the fuck did they have sex?
Just the curiosity of it is
It's
appealing
like
in itself.
that's it. There's nothing wrong with being curious. Like
Mhm.
minding your own business is really important, but you can be curious. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Exactly. And I think that's something really important about The Shape of Water is that Eliza's never like judged for the romance. Do you know what I mean? Like her friend's a bit like, what? But she's like, okay, good for you.
And that's
And
what you
then
want from like your bestie.
exactly, and the neighbor's the same. And I think that's what's really cool about, say, like we're talking about forbidden romance films. It, another thing that kind of like links a couple of them is that there's not really like outside judgment. It's just it happens, which is
Mm-hmm.
really funny because in a lot of romances which are like two everyday normal people, there's a lot more judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So these are very
Do you know what?
interesting.
That's it, because when you have stuff say like Romeo and Juliet
Mm,
or Titanic, as much as like they are obviously super romantic, you get pulled away from the romance a lot because like you said of the outside judgment,
yeah.
whereas the conflict that comes in The Shape of Water doesn't come from the fact that people are like, you two can't be together. It's just the fact that this is a creature that the government do not want
Yeah.
released to the public.
It's interesting how like these kind of setups and dynamics make the romance much more insular. Like it's a lot more intimate, you know, because
Mm-hmm.
the outside world's there, but it's in a very different way. to, yeah, Romeo and Juliet, Titanic
Which
and
I
all.
feel like is perfectly encapsulated in that scene where they're in her apartment and they flood it
Oh my god,
so that
so I
they can
love
like
that
embrace
so
and be
much.
together. It's so fucking beautiful.
And it's like starting to get a bit sexy and stuff, and you're like, what's going
Yeah.
on here? I mean, I'm not sure how long we've been talking about The Shape of Water so far. I could talk about it forever, but if we're
Hmm.
talking about, say, like shutting out the outside world and all, I think it's time to move on to Bones and All, because I
True.
felt that that film was so bizarre. It captured the American landscape so beautifully, which blew my
Hmm.
mind considering it's by an Italian director, you know, and it's shot in this way that's like nostalgic for the American countryside, but he did not grow up there. And I just
Yeah.
thought that was really impressive. But
Hmm.
kind of that whole like emptiness of the Midwest was perfect for Bones and All, I felt, because it felt like these two people like kind of taking on the world, and
Hmm.
everything just felt like paintings. There's that one particular scene where they're sat on like the hilltop. Do you know the one I mean? There's kind of like breeze
Yeah.
in that air, and I just thought he's managed to capture like these two absolutely gorgeous human beings in this
Hmm.
way. It just all felt like a painting to me. I was just like,
So
chef's kiss.
this is the thing that I had with Bones and All. So just
Hmm.
to get it off my chest from the beginning,
Hmm.
I didn't like it.
Fair enough.
Or it's not that I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it as much as I really wanted to.
I was the same.
The biggest thing is because I didn't buy into the romance of it.
Hmm.
Just before we really dive into the film, I'm just going to give like a brief description just for anyone who might not have seen it or just needs a quick reminding of it. So, Bones and All came out last year, and it stars Taylor Russell and Timothy Chalamet. Stripping it down to its bare bones, the plot follows Taylor Russell's character Marin after her dad abandons her, and she travels across the country to try and find her mum. On this journey, she meets Timmy Chalamet's Lee, and it's probably worth mentioning at this point that they are both cannibals, and that's the reason that her dad left, and she's so desperate to find her mom to figure out what the fuck is going on with her.
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And might I add, her mum is played by absolute icon Chloe Sevigny, which I didn't know
I
until I was
didn't know
watching. I
either.
flipped my lid.
When she first came on screen, I was like, is it? And like I was watching it with my fiance, and she doesn't know who she is, and I was like, oh my god! And I think she thought that maybe like something crazy was happening when like
Yeah.
nothing was happening, but I was like,
Well, this is just another example of knowing your audience. Like, Chloe
yeah,
Sevigny is loved by the queer community, so
so much.
go. But like, what I felt, so I was the exact same. I really enjoyed it, but I went in expecting it to be a very different film to what it was, like
I
massively.
said to you, like literally immediately after I watched it, and
Yeah,
it's like I thought, and this isn't the only reason that I didn't like it as much as I thought I would, but I thought they were going to be absolutely feral for each other.
me
Like you're
too.
giving me a cannibalistic love story. I was expecting
Hmm.
like, if not tearing the flesh off each other, at least tearing the clothes off each other. But like, and it's weird because in some ways it's like, no, like okay, maybe I did actually like that it was a bit more subdued.
Hmm.
I did not enjoy their kiss in the slaughterhouse, and it wasn't even because it was in the slaughterhouse. It was because these two people have just never kissed anybody before.
Yeah, I mean,
I felt like the kiss was really awkward,
I
and
felt
it just didn't. I think it was like to me. Yeah, you know, go on.
oh, I was just gonna say, I really, really felt like the there was like there was something missing in the physicality. So
Mm-hmm.
I could buy into like, oh, these two lonely people, da 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 da. But I felt like maybe it's something that's better in the script. Maybe they cast people that didn't have the right kind of chemistry. Or also,
I think
and
so.
I kind of had this conversation with my boyfriend, and it was that um we were debating, we don't think this was intentional, right? We think that maybe like, because some people see chemistry between them. I personally don't see very much. I see like a kinship. So the way I kind of almost looked at it was, oh, maybe this is just two lonely people that are like they found each other. Like maybe like they wouldn't have been together in another life, but like they're together now. Do you know what I mean? Like kind of like that
Mm-hmm.
kind of opposite. It's the same, two sides of the same coin. You know, like not necessarily soulmates, but they found each other. You know what I mean? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of viewed it that way, but I don't think that was intentional. But I think that's
Mm-hmm.
romantic in a very different way. Also, the other thing is that I was saying to my boyfriend, I was like, I expected a lot more shagging and stuff. And he was like, why'd you say that? I was like, every piece of media I have watched to do with cannibalism has made it this very primal physical thing. And he was like, Yeah, but then that's just you making assumptions based on things you've watched before, and I was like, you got me there. You've
That's a
got me
good point.
there.
And do you
Yeah.
know what? This is where I was like almost kind of like slapping myself on the hand for like you said, for expecting that.
Yeah.
I guess it's just more like to just defend myself and maybe you
Mm.
slightly. It's not necessarily just that it lacked physical intimacy. Like that was kind of fine, but for me, like you said, I didn't buy into the chemistry of it. And
Yeah.
I think maybe I was also kind of upset because I was like, you know what? If they don't have chemistry, that's fine. Because I agree with you. I did buy into the kindred like spirits of like
Yeah.
them, because obviously cannibalism was like a metaphor for generational trauma,
Yeah.
and that really played really well in the film. And I feel like I felt that from the characters, because they were both, don't get me wrong, they were both fantastic in it. Like I don't think their acting was bad at all, but I almost kind of wish that maybe they'd had a platonic love instead then, because then it also would have given me something that I feel like too many films don't do, is when you have a cis man and a cis woman in situations like that, they always have to be romantic. They can never have like a platonic romance.
Completely agree. Thing is, I do think the romance was needed, but I wish maybe it was more acknowledged, like that they just found comfort in each other rather than trying to push romance. Because I was the same. I like towards the end, I bought into it a lot more. Like their like shared space and home that they'd built and all, but it just kind of felt like it got to that point way too late for me
That's
personally.
exactly what I said. Like that end, like the ending shot of them on the hill together, I thought was really beautiful. And I think that was when I was like, oh, okay, I
Oh,
kind
now I
of
get
get it
it.
now. But it went on way, way too long. I honestly, for a film, and again, this is maybe me having expectations that I shouldn't, but I just feel like for a film that was a cannibalistic love story, it felt like nothing happened
Yeah,
a
no, I
lot of the
agree.
time, or like a lot happened at once, and then there was this big emptiness,
Yeah, I
which
didn't really like that it just kind of dulled and then Sully turned up again.
I didn't think Sully needed to be in it,
But
honestly.
well, I quite liked the Sully thing simply because I liked the idea of how it's not necessarily the cannibalism putting her in danger. Like, do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. But one thing I will say, what I think it could have really benefited from, and one thing we do have to consider is that this is kind of like a teenage romance novel. So there is kind of that teenagey element to it, which I did feel while I was watching it. So that kind of explains why there's probably a sexual element missing. But anyway, I was thinking it could have been really good if you saw other people, not the lead couple, but other people that lived a lifestyle like that. Kind of like, I know it sounds really cringy, but kind of like Twilight vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like but kind of done in less of a teenage way. But like they could have kind of they did run into two that were like really devoid of humanity. I loved that bit.
Right, that bit I found so interesting, and I really wish they'd expanded on it a bit more,
What,
because
like they
wasn't it
come back, not Sully.
what maybe, well, honestly, I think them coming back would have made more sense, but
Yeah.
I don't know, because I thought it was interesting that, like, so unless I'm remembering it wrong, the other two people that they did meet at one point, one of them was like them, and then the other one was choosing to be, and I
I
was like,
loved that.
that is really fucking interesting, because
Yeah.
honestly, that's actually what I thought the two
It
main
was gonna be
characters
like,
were going to be.
oh, okay.
I thought either she was going to be a cannibal or he was going to be a cannibal, and then they were going to meet.
Yeah.
To anybody who's seen our Fresh reaction video, this is also kind of what I thought Fresh was going to be. Maybe this is just what I'm after
Yeah,
personally, but I thought it was going to be, yeah, one of them was going to be a cannibal and the other one was going to choose that lifestyle to be with them, which I think would have actually gotten the romance across a lot more, because it's like the things you will do for the people you love.
Yeah,
But more
true.
importantly, because there are a lot of films that deal with people who will go to extremes for their loved ones, but the extremes that only, well, not only, but affect you. So it's not like, oh, I'm killing somebody for you. It's I'm killing somebody for you and consuming them, even though I know I don't
Yeah.
have to, but because I don't want you to feel alone in this world.
But the only thing, I think, if they went that far, it would have been morally reprehensible, and you would just could not, like, as a human being, it'd be so hard to buy into the love story. I think
Did you
that's
not think it was horrible?
no,
I
no,
felt
I
like that
did. I
anyway.
did. No. But like, I mean, it would just take it to that point of no return. I think if that was the case, it would work really well for like a really dark, like way more like weird niche underground film, but for the size of this film, I don't think they could have. But I completely get what you're saying.
I guess for me, it's kind of like, obviously, I do not condone what they did in this film at all. But I wouldn't have seen it like that. I think I would have put my morality aside quite easily because it's a
I don't
film,
think I
obviously.
could.
I think I would have been able to, because I just buy into love and I buy into extreme love as
You
well,
have
which
to remember that you are such a romantic, whereas a lot of the
yeah.
audience kind of will be put off a lot more.
Fair. I think I'm just being really selfish and I'm looking for a really specific film for me.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that film is going to be out there somewhere someday. We'll find it. But like, I just think for me with Bones and All, it was really, rather than trying to sell like, oh, there is romance in this, it was really trying to show you how fucked up it is, which I kind of like admired in a way, because I think a lot of films about cannibalism don't do that. So like the best way I can put it is the sound design. You hit every crunch and munch, and it kind of like hits the reality. Do you know what I mean? It hits home a
Yeah,
lot more.
that was nasty.
And I thought that was a genius choice, because I think the sound puts you in it more than the visuals do in a weird way. I really do, because you see violence on screen so often, but it's not often that you like actually hear a lot of the noise associated with it. I felt like, oh my god, it was so grim. That first scene where you see Sully like lapping up the old woman's blood and stuff. It was the
Yeah.
sounds that got me so much, and I
Mhm.
was just like, this is the grimmest depiction of
Mhm.
cannibalism that I've ever seen. And that, honest to God, worse than Raw, in my opinion. And Raw
Oh,
was more
yeah.
of a straight up horror film. I thought it was fascinating.
I
But
guess it's because, I don't know, with Raw, it was kind of like,
it was kind of more about, I hate to say it, but it was more kind of about being like, I'm coming of age, I'm cool. Like, this
yeah,
still,
it was.
but it was more like edgy.
Yeah, it was. Whereas I think Bones and All, like, despite the fact both of them had this whatever it was affliction that
Yeah.
gave them a desire to eat people, this Bones and All made it feel a lot more, forgive the unintentional pun, but consuming,
Yeah.
as in like she could not escape this.
Yeah.
There was no fun in this. There was no
Yeah.
like, and I guess when then she was with Lee, it was like this desperation to live, but for what?
Yeah,
Like how,
exactly.
like this kind of
And
living.
it's so fascinating to look at how two different filmmakers really portrayed cannibalism, because in Raw, it was like, it was a familial thing, which I think is quite interesting to like think about. But in Raw, it was like empowering, and it made them cooler and all this. And then in Bones and All, it was a curse, and like you say, it was
Yeah.
consuming, and they didn't want to do it. And I think that's what gives the romance more weight in a way. I think if it was empowering, you wouldn't buy into the romance, because they wouldn't need that companionship so much. So we've now talked about two films about people, sleeping with other, you could say, people, at least their flesh. Now we're going to move on to someone fucking an inanimate object, which
Yep.
means Titan.
So this film out of the three was my favorite. I fucking loved it, but it was also the one that traumatized me the most. What was really funny is that I watched both of them with my fiance, who I think I mentioned a couple of times is not a horror fan, doesn't really go for the weird and creepy and kooky. Why she's with me, I don't know. But I said to her, I was like, I'm going to be watching these films for the podcast. I know she was interested in watching Bones and All because she had seen the trailer and totally mistook what it was and thought it was just a romance.
Are you joking?
Oh yeah, she sent me. She had sent me like a link to it, and she went, "Oh my god, this looks really cute, and Timothy Chalamet's in it. We should watch it." And I was like, "Girl, do you know what this is?" And I told her, and she was like, "Oh, okay, maybe not." But she did watch it, and she also didn't like it. But not only did she not like it, kind of for some of the reasons we said, she also was really disturbed by it. She actually struggled to sleep afterwards.
Oh, bless her.
But but I was like fine, and I was like, oh, I've watched loads of films like this before, like it takes a lot to get to me. But then we watched Titan, and I knew that it was going to be different. I thought my fiance might like it because it is a French film. My fiance is French. I thought, just being able to watch a film in her native language would be better. I think she liked it, but she was not disturbed by it like at all. She thought it was weird, she wasn't really disturbed or
Do
put off
you
by it.
think it was because it's so bizarre that you can almost detach a bit?
I don't know, Leanna, because it disturbed the fuck out of me.
Me too.
I had to look away so many times. And it's almost because I forgot two really important things about this film. One, it's a body horror, and body horror is my kryptonite. I love body horror films, but it's because, like
They
you,
get
it's the
to you.
thing that gets to me.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, I had somehow forgotten that this was a Julia Ducournau film, the queen of the body horror, and not just that, specifically the queen for the body horror with the female body. And I was like, yeah, that's it. That's my review.
It's a needed
Silence.
voice, isn't it? 100%. Yeah.
Mhm.
I completely believe that. I think it's fascinating that that didn't disturb her so much. But like I say,
I
maybe
thought so too.
yeah, maybe it's just because like bones and all like that could happen in the real world. Like people literally do eat other people. But like I don't know, that's really
Yeah, very much out of the realm of reality.
yes, exactly. Like,
So
who actually
it's
gets like spoiler territory? Who the fuck gets impregnated by a car? You know?
okay. So just because it's so out of the realm of reality, I'm going to remind people who have seen it and tell people who haven't seen it what the film is about. So, as I already mentioned, Titane is directed by Julia Ducournau, who was the director of the film Raw, which, for anyone who doesn't know, was the first film we ever talked about for White Noise.
Yeah.
It's a great episode. Go watch it. Great film. Go watch it. But Titane, to me, was a wild ride because it's almost like it's split into three different storylines. So the first storyline starts with Alexia. Is that her name?
Yeah, I'm not good with the pronunciation if I'm gonna be real.
Neither am I. That's what I'm going to be saying. I apologize if it's wrong. But the first storyline starts with Alexia when she is a child. She gets to a car crash and suffers a brain injury and subsequently has to have a titanium plate put in her head. Then fast forward a few years, this titanium plate not only hold on, I'm gonna start that again. Fast forward a few years, and she is now an exotic dancer who fucks cars, presumably because of this titanium plate that's been put inside her head. But then on top of that, she is also a murderer because we see her murder somebody so smoothly that it's definitely not her first time. So she murders this guy. Then she goes on to murder a whole room of people. The police obviously find out about this, so she has to go on the run. Then enter the second storyline. She disguises herself as someone's missing son by cutting off all her hair, smashing her face violently into a sink, and binding her body. And then enter the third storyline where she is horrifically pregnant with a Cadillac's baby. What do you want to unpack first?
Let's do it in chronological order. Yeah, let's go. So, first of all, when she starts killing people, I was like, okay, slay. This is kind of what I'm expecting, you know? I mean, we had the fucking car scene, let's discuss. That, to go from that to killing, I was just like, okay, this film's going to be crazy. Like, you just,
Yeah.
how quick does that happen in the film? It's like, what, like 10, maybe 15 minutes in? It's so immediate. You're just like, okay, I'm in for some batshit stuff for this, like, what's the runtime? Hour and a half, 2 hours. And you just like, I just think that's so brilliant to like not be like, okay, this is going to be the like huge set piece that we're going to work our way up to through the film. It's like, oh, we're going to start with this. It's like, where's it going to go from here? And like, it's so funny to me because we've included this in our Forbidden Love episode, but like, really, the love aspect is in the first few minutes.
Do you know what though? And it's like I've also just realized that like the first two films are love in the romantic sense. This one is it's so funny because this is the film that even made us come up with the idea for this episode, and yet the other two films we chose to talk about are super romantic. This film isn't romantic. I don't know how you could see it as romantic.
Like gritty and grim, like or, you know, when she's like, this sounds so vile, and I know you're gonna hate it in particular, but like when she's like oozing. No, not for me, thank you. It's just like it's almost like vulgar.
Yeah.
It's the only way I could put it. Like I was like, ooh. Like you know when you're watching a film that like kind of goes into like the reality of sex, like heterosexual sex, and like you know, like people like talk about things like cum and stuff like that. It always feels so grim, and then this is just like taken to another level. And I was like, Oh my
But
God, I
this
don't
is
want to see it.
why, like, when people always talk about people who take sex so seriously, like, sex is not, like,
It's
yes, it is
nasty.
serious, but it is gross, it is funny, it is
Yeah.
awkward. And I feel like
It's
that's why these,
weirdly like discussed in this film in a very bizarre way.
yeah. The thing is though, so I did know that a lot of people have seen this film as a representation of the trans experience, which, you know, we aren't going to delve too much into because we've said before, like, we are cis women,
Mhm.
we can't speak on that experience. Check out our socials after this episode because we'll share some sources for people who explain it so much better than us.
Mhm.
But it's not the only way that the film can be interpreted, which is why, again, films that have layers, they're just amazing. Um, Obviously, a big theme in this film, and then you could say in the other films as well that links them, is again trauma. And this is going to get into a slightly uncomfortable scenario. So if these kind of things do affect you, please do stop listening. But obviously, sexual trauma was like a big part in this film, and almost like the whole thing about her having sex with cars to me came across as like a representation of hypersexuality, which can
Yeah,
come after sexual
I
trauma,
felt the same.
which is why I don't know if maybe like that's why I actually ended up liking the film so much, because I just thought what an absolutely ingenious way to portray an experience that people themselves, you know, can't really explain it when it happens. Like, hypersexuality isn't something I even really knew how to name until like a few years ago, which is ridiculous because it's such an important experience that people go through, and they think there's something wrong with them, which in the character of Alexia we see, like, because like the first time that she has sex with the car, it's like, what the fuck is going on? Because it only actually happens twice in the film, but then the second time it happens, it's almost like she doesn't want to be doing it. And like that's when it hit me that I was like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I get it now.
I was the same as you. I didn't know there was a name for, hypersexuality, but obviously kind of like knew about it as a concept. Um, I mean, we see it so much in real life and media. It was so fascinating to see, like you said, an ingenious, different way of showing it that kind of like really helps you see, like, this is not, I don't want to use the word normal, but it's not necessarily always a healthy response. And I think sometimes like filmmakers have to use those extremes to illustrate something, because just seeing that same thing you've seen a million times doesn't sink in for a lot of audiences. And I mean, like, to an extent, me included, like I was the same, like watching the film, the second scene, I was just like, oh, okay, this is allowing you to see it so differently. And I thought it was very clever to do that in the second instance, not the first. Do you know what I mean? You get to know the
Yeah.
character and start to understand why this is happening more. I felt that it was done in almost like a delicate way, like a caring way. And Raw was the same. I just think like Julia Ducournau, she like has this ability to like show people at the most like bizarre and like
Yeah.
feral when you still care for them, and you like, you don't, like, they could be absolutely bizarre. Like these, in both films, the protagonist is a killer, but like you genuinely care about their well-being.
I think it's because, and this is something we also spoke about last year at some point, no, the year before even, like in our first Halloween specials, in like our controversial films,
Yeah.
the fact that so many people have storylines like this for the sake of like shocking or traumatizing the
Yeah.
audience, whereas in this film you could tell that wasn't the case. And I think, like you said, it's so important that you had two isolated scenes where she was intimate with these cars, because the first time you're just like not thinking about what's happening because
Yeah.
you're like, this is a weird fucking thing that's happening. And also I feel like if she had portrayed those emotions the first time, it would be like, well, obviously she's not enjoying it, it's a car. So to show her in that moment of ecstasy, but then later on the same thing but not, like, really made you realize what she was trying to portray. And that was it. It's the fact that she didn't do this for the sake of, oh, everybody's going to talk about this film because it's about someone having sex with cars. she used it to get across something that like even people who experience it don't always understand what's happening.
Exactly. And I think it's really interesting to like throw you in with the lead character, because in a way, like they might not even have like started to understand their own feelings towards what they're doing until like that second instance. So you kind of are experiencing it along with them. And it's just like this like complete exercise in empathy, really, I would say Titane is, from so many different sides, because obviously there's the father and there's the main character and there's just so many things that make you have to sit and like start to like understand someone else in like this very extreme way. It's very extreme empathy, I think,
Yeah.
because you're having to empathize with someone over something that like you will never actually experience. But I felt that as well, to talk about the two isolated scenes, it's really clever because it's training you. Because like you said, if she was like crying and stuff and like, you know, being just like, you know, like we say, like it wouldn't, you'd think, like you said, oh, it's just because this is a very weird thing to do. But by introducing it, you're not just like showing the two different reactions, you're also kind of like making it less bizarre for the audience, if that makes sense. Like, oh, we've already seen this once, so because you're seeing it a second time, you're less focused on like what is actually happening and more on the character's emotion. You know,
I also think it's even the situations in which the two scene happens. So like the first scene happens nearer the beginning of the film. Yes, she has just killed somebody, but you know, we have just seen that she's an exotic dancer. She is in these very sensual and sexual environments. Whereas then the second time it happens, she has just been embarrassed, I guess is the best way to put it, because you know, all the other firefighters like put her up on the truck and like she's dancing, and then the dad comes in and he sees her, and so obviously it feels like ashamed of what's happened, and yet she goes and does that, and it's like in your head a lot of the audience be thinking, well, why would you do that in that situation? It's like exactly,
yeah,
that's
like
exactly the point.
coping.
That's just it. And then and then obviously afterwards it goes into some of the most intense horrific body horror I've ever seen. And it's like, I know a lot of people would watch it, like the lead up to the birth scene, and then just everything that happens throughout the film be like, oh, this isn't even that bad, I've seen worse. And it's like, I don't know if it's just being a woman and just or just having like a fear of pregnancy in general, but it just really got to me. Like even when she was like scratching at her body, I think I even said this when we talked about Raw, because scratching was a big thing in that as well. The fact that it was like she couldn't help but do it, and it's like not having control of your own body and feeling trapped by your own body. It was just done so well. I felt really claustrophobic during those scenes.
That's actually a very good word to use. I never would have used the word claustrophobic before when talking about like Julia Ducournau's films, but it's a brilliant way to put it, because yeah, like she has this way of making you almost feel like trapped within your own skin. And like the human body is itself like this bizarre thing to be in, and like a casing, and like makes you very aware of like your own flesh in a bizarre way, if you know what I mean. I mean, we've gone down a million rabbit holes here, and this is supposed to be our Forbidden Love episode. But I knew this was going to happen. I knew Titane was the best one to finish with in a way, because we were going to do this. But I think out of all of the films we've talked about today, I would have to say that they are all brilliant at achieving different things. So Shape of Water is really good at like kind of discussing like, you know, romance that isn't meant to be, so forbidden in that way. Bones and All is discussing like when the two people themselves are considered outsiders and all. And then Titane is just like a brilliant way to like explore, you know, something that you yourself don't even want to let happen in a bizarre way. But I think that out of the three, if we were going to say favourites, and the one I would really suggest to people would probably be Titane, because I feel like that's the one, as an individual, I gained the most from. I don't know about you.
I mean, Titane was my favourite without a doubt. I think, though, I would probably say The Shape of Water, just for the fact I think it's a lot more of an accessible film.
True.
Like, there are a lot of people that will watch Titane and not have any idea what we're even talking about. But for the people that do, it is an intense film. It is a hard watch. I'm really glad I didn't actually watch it by myself, because I think I would have found it a lot more upsetting if I'd watched it by myself. Whereas The Shape of Water like doesn't have, it's a different kind of trauma basically. All three films have different kinds of trauma, to be honest. Like, you know, you could be affected by anyone. For me, Titane, that's the trauma that got to me. but it is a fantastic film. Like, if you're somebody who, I mean, if you've seen Raw, then definitely watch it without a doubt. But if you're just somebody who likes, I don't know, like you said, these kind of very real experiences and emotions being portrayed in kind of extremist ways, then yeah, it's great. Because also a lot of people have said that you could even see the film as totally metaphorical. Like, none of it actually happens outside of Alexia's head, which would make so much sense considering it started with her having a brain injury. And I really love that because it almost kind of makes it more believable. Like, you can't even be like, oh, well, you can't see the scene as this because that doesn't actually happen. Like, it physically doesn't make sense or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but then if you think about it from the perspective of like, this is how her brain is trying to rationalize the trauma that she's going through, it does make sense.
I also think that we've said this with previous films. I mean, we discussed this in the Skinamarink episode. Sometimes if you go into a film trying to make it literal and make sense of it, that's on you, not the film. So that's on you if you just care too much about the actual logic. If we're just to like say start wrapping up and all, I just want to kind of maybe like name a few other films if you're interested in this weird little like niche genre we're discussing. I mean, we're talking a lot about passion as well as romance in this. I would probably recommend Crash by David Cronenberg, because that goes so much into like taboo sex and passion and like, is this okay? And there's a lot of discussion about how like taboo sex ties into like romantic relationships. So I definitely recommend that one. And I mean, anyone that likes Julia Ducournau's films usually tends to like Cronenberg's, like as a general rule. But is there any you would recommend?
Not off the top of my head, other than Raw, which I know seems so obvious. Well, Raw, Ginger Snaps, just anything that kind of like Raw and Ginger Snaps are a bit different. Like, they're not so much the love and the romance. Well, not the romance, the love, yes, because we spoke about how they're like sibling love. But it's just that extremist portrayal of these feelings and emotions and connections that we have with people that I feel like we almost take for granted.
Yes,
I think that's what all three of these films do. Feelings and emotions that we take for granted in everyday life are kind of shown to us through a really visceral lens. And it makes you both, I think, appreciate these things more and then also, just become more aware of them.
Exactly. It's just that typical case of like amplifying things. If you've gotten this far into the episode, right at the end, and you still can't quite understand what we're getting at, I feel like a more accessible way to explain it is just like Jennifer's body, like making sense of, like that queer friendship you had as a teen. Let's make the girl a demon. It's that kind of thing, it's not literal. It's about how can we explore these things in a more like dreamlike, surreal or horrific sense. I really enjoyed this episode. It was fun to talk about like horror romance, I mean, we talk about like adjacent stuff a lot, but this is just specifically devoted to this topic. It's great.
I agree.
Yeah, so if you enjoyed this, please, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a like and subscribe. If you're on any kind of like streaming service or podcast platform, leave a like on those if you can. And yeah, we want to hear your recommendations if you can think of anything similar. And if you liked this episode, because this was a bit of a weirder one.
This episode, like, to me made sense. To Leanna probably made sense. Maybe it's more chaotic than we realize. So if you want clarification as well for some of the stuff we were talking about, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, at W Noise Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, all of our socials will be linked below. If you're elsewhere, go to our YouTube. Again, I always say this, you will find our socials. And yeah, like Leanna said, leave likes help us so much because it also gives us a direction of what people want to see from us, because we really love talking about like these kind of things, like the things we like, but we also want to know what our audience like, what our audience are watching. So
yeah, exactly, it's about the audience as much as it is about us at the end of the day. So yeah, Skype it really well. You can find us on everything, and that's bye for today. So, bye.